To what reason does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute for the purpose of inquiring about next week's schedule.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank the Speaker, and I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader, for the purpose of announcing next week's schedule.
I thank the Republican whip for yielding. On Monday, the House will meet at 12:30 p.m. for morning hour debate, 2 p.m. for legislative business. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10:30 a.m. for morning hour debate and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Wednesday and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for legislative business. On Friday, no votes are expected. We will consider several bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspensions, as is the tradition, will be announced by the close of business tomorrow. In addition, we will consider Senate amendments to H.R. 146, the Omnibus Public Land Management Act of 2009, and H.R. 1404, Federal Land Assistance Management and Enhancement Act.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman. I'd like to ask the gentleman that in reference to his mention of the Public Lands Omnibus Bill, and that would be coming back to the floor. And I'd like to ask the gentleman, that will the Republicans be given a motion to recommit or an opportunity to amend this bill?
The bill comes back, of course, it's a House bill being returned with amendments, as the gentleman I'm sure knows. And under those circumstances, of course, we consider that there's not a motion to recommit on that kind of a procedure. So the answer there would be there would not be a motion to recommit. As the gentleman also knows, this bill came 2 votes short of two-thirds majority, with very significant Republican and Democratic support of the bill. This bill has been hanging around for a long period of time. It is composed largely, although not exclusively, of bills that have passed the House, largely on suspension. So the answer to the gentleman's question is we believe there's been demonstrated overwhelming support for the substance of this bill. It's been hanging around a long time. We want to see it get it passed. And the answer is probably not.
I thank the gentleman. As the gentleman knows, certainly there are procedures in place to waive the rules so that we can, on the minority side, have a voice in the passage of this legislation, consistent with what President Obama has continued to say, which is we should change the way this town works and continue to allow all sides to have a voice in what Congress does. And I think, as we saw over the last week, evidence or results of rushing things through the House, disallowing our side to have a say in legislation, may very well end up with the wrong result. So I'm saddened to hear that we will not be having an opportunity to offer an amendment to that bill. I'd ask the gentleman.
Will my friend yield on that point?
Sure, yes.
As the gentleman I'm sure knows that many of the provisions, I don't know that I have the specific count, are Republican-sponsored bills in this what the Senate packaged, as you know, so that a large percentage, I don't know exactly what the percentage is, whether it's 30%, 35%, are Republican-sponsored pieces of legislation.
I thank the gentleman. I think that the percentage would probably be reflecting the fact that there may be 17 or so Republican provisions in the bill out of 140 so. So I wouldn't necessarily say, Mr. Speaker, that that would reflect what our side would amend or hope to amend the bill with. But I would like to ask the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, that last week he was on the floor and he mentioned that a stem cell bill would be coming to the floor prior to the recess. And since you have not noticed, since the gentleman has not noticed the bill for next week, I'd ask, Mr. Speaker, could the gentleman tell us if he expects it on the floor the following week?
It's possible. I wouldn't say I had an expectation. It's being worked on. There is a strong feeling by the sponsors of the legislation, as you know, that passed in the last Congress through this House handily, and I think in agreement with the administration that in addition to the administration's executive order, legislation is necessary to give certainty to what can and cannot be done by researchers. And we obviously want to make sure that researchers understand what the law is, what the opportunities are, and what the prohibitions are. so that legislation is possible. But I want to tell my friend that I did not announce it for next week. I don't expect legislation next week. I think it is possible for the week following, but I don't want to go beyond that. We'll certainly let the gentleman know as soon as I know.
I thank the gentleman. I'd like to, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask further question of the gentleman that as we've been told that the budget will be marked up next week, and wondering from the gentleman, number one, if he expects the budget on the floor the following week, and in addition to that, am curious, as are the members on our side of the aisle, about the subjects of your discussions with Chairman Spratt as to the direction of the budget. There's been a lot of discussion publicly as well as in these halls about the proposed cap and tax proposal, where some economists, those from MIT and others, predict that if we are to provide for the cap and tax proposal, that it'll cost American families at least $3,100 every year. And that, to me, is a great cause for alarm, especially given the economic times and the struggle that the working families of this country are encountering. It was also revealed this week that the number provided for in the proposed budget has underestimated the real cost of cap and tax, and if that is the case, that is even more alarming given the fact that if we're looking at over $3,000 per family tax, what is it that we are doing if we are putting that cost on anybody who pays an electric bill, anyone who pays a gas bill, anyone who buys anything manufactured in this country? So I'd ask the gentleman if he is contemplating that the budget proposal that will come to the floor will have that in it. I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. My presumption is that you've now come up with a new phrase on your side of the aisle. I do know about cap and trade, and it's talked about regularly, but maybe that's not as politically salient as cap and tax. It seems innovative. But if the gentleman, as I presume he is referring to what is commonly known by everybody else as cap and trade, let me say this. The Budget Committee obviously will mark up on the 25th. That's next Wednesday. We expect to bring the budget bill to the floor the following week, the last week before the Easter break. My expectation is that there will be provisions in there for energy and global warming consideration. But my further expectation is it will not adopt a premise of one alternative over another, that will be subject to the legislative process, and that one will not be chosen in the budget itself, so that voting on the budget would not be giving precedence to one alternative over another.
I thank the gentleman. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask whether the gentleman could tell us as to the prospects for reconciliation instructions to be included in the budget. We have heard this week that the White House has told leaders on your side of the aisle to pursue health care reform through reconciliation as well. And to us, this seems like a straight-up partisan approach, something I don't think that the American people are looking for right now, especially when it comes to items such as taxes, items like health care that everyone is concerned with. There is no distinction made between hardship on health care between Republican and Democrat. So I'd like to ask the gentleman, will the budget be coming through with reconciliation instructions? And I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. First of all, the gentleman indicated that we've been told by the White House. I had some comments on how the Republican majority responded, from my perspective, without fail, to the Bush administration. We have discussions with our White House. We don't tell them, they don't tell us. We have discussions, positive discussions, on how we together can move this country forward. Those discussions clearly have had reconciliation as a subject of discussions. But I will tell the gentleman that those decisions by the Budget Committee have not been made, nor have they been made by the chairman of the Budget Committee. But they clearly are part of the discussion. Reconciliation, as the gentleman knows, have been in our rules for a very long period of time. When the Republicans were in power, reconciliation was something that they used. They are in the process to facilitate the adoption of a budget and policies consistent with the budget, i.e. to reconcile the budget, the authorization and the policy with the budget that has been adopted. So I say to the gentleman that that's certainly under consideration, but no decision on that has been made.
I thank the gentleman, and I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that the gentleman would also share the attitude of discussing with us the direction, just as you indicate that the White House discusses but doesn't tell you what to do. So I like that spirit of cooperation. I would ask the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, further about any insight he can give us as to TARP 2 budgeting. As we all know, if we do not get the banking system fixed, we won't have the credit system fixed for the small businesses of this country, and we won't see the economy get back on the path to growth. So I'd ask the gentleman, is he contemplating a number in the budget? Does Mr. Spratt, your conversation with Chairman Spratt, indicate what we could expect there? And I yield.
I don't want to anticipate what the Budget Committee will do. The gentleman is referring to the placeholder that the administration suggested in the budget. They did so because they wanted to present a budget that did, in fact, anticipate possible costs. To that extent, it was probably one of the most honest budgets that we received, honest in the sense that it included the prospective costs. As you know, we've been somewhat critical in the past of costs that we knew were coming down the pike, but which were not included. So the administration did that. Now, whether or not the Budget Committee itself decides to include those costs, I don't know. But I do know this, that there has been no decision on a additional TARP appropriation or authorization. Clearly, we are hopeful that we will stabilize the economy. We have moved forward in many respects on a bipartisan basis on this, certainly not in every respect. We've done some tough things because we thought the crisis that confronted our country demanded action. We've all been very disappointed with some of the manifestations of that, and I think we're going to continue to look at this very carefully. The Financial Services Committee is marking up a bill this coming week, which I expect to have on the floor the following week, dealing with constraints on those who receive funds from the federal government, from the taxpayer, to shore up our economy. Not to shore up those businesses, but to shore up the businesses as they relate to the impact their failure would have on the economy. But I think the gentleman and I share a view that we certainly need to have knowledge, and we will have knowledge if the administration believes that it needs additional resources, and the Congress will have that to consider. I would say that the environment for such a piece of legislation right now is not particularly good.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman further on that note about a markup in the Financial Services Committee. I take it to mean that the Financial Services Committee will be working on a piece of legislation not necessarily aimed at a bank fix in making sure we can get the impaired assets out of the market, but instead, from what I hear the gentleman say, that it is a bill aimed at providing a structure for those businesses, those institutions receiving TARP funds, and I yield.
I think that's accurate.
And gentlemen, I thank the gentleman. And an additional question along those lines, Mr. Speaker. Could we expect then the following week for that bill to be coming to the floor?
That's my expectation, yes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, this week we heard an announcement from the President of a plan to support small businesses. And as the gentleman knows, the Republican plan for stimulus was focused like a laser on the job creators, which are the small businesses of this economy. We know that 70% of the jobs come from small business entrepreneurs and the self-employed. So we were very delighted to see the announcement, and I know that the gentleman himself had some public comments to make as well, lauding the move towards finally saying, if we're going to create jobs, we better go and focus on small business. But my concern is, Mr. Speaker, that when you're talking about small business and the SBA, truly 9 out of 10 small businesses in this country have not had any encounter with the SBA, nor do they intend to or want to. I tell the gentleman, in my district, I had a small business forum last week, spoke to 25 small business people. What they're asking for is access to credit. They are looking for the banking system to work. They want their own community banks, not necessarily government strings attached to loans. And so they also are looking for relief from the tax code. And as we have noted on the floor several times, Mr. Speaker, that the budget that was proposed by the White House actually impacts small businesses more than anyone else. In fact, 50% of those receiving a tax hike in accordance with the President's budget are small businesses. So with that in mind, and given that the gentleman has applauded the move on the part of the White House to help provide relief to small businesses, I'd ask the gentleman, are there any plans to include tax relief for small businesses in the majority's budget as it works its way through committee and then to the floor next week? I yield.
I thank the gentleman for his question. As he points out, on this side of the aisle, we certainly have great concern for small businesses. And although I don't want to be argumentative, the situation we find ourselves in was inherited. It was inherited from a previous administration that believed in a number of things, particularly the policies that you have offered to once again pursue, which we didn't think would work, and we think, frankly, have in some respects been a cause of the crisis that confronts this country. Furthermore, we think the administration's focus on deregulation and taking the regulators out of circulation was a significant cause. We also think that the failure of the Federal Reserve to enforce the 1994 law that was passed by the Congress and which was enforced by Chairman Bernanke in 07 when he took office, which allowed the Federal Reserve the authority to oversee the subprime market, and the theory that Mr. Greenspan had that the market would regulate itself. In point of fact, we see in AIG, the market did not regulate itself. It went on a binge of irresponsibility and greed. And so I want to make it clear that while we're very concerned about small business, it is huge businesses that have put them in the trick bag. It is huge businesses that weren't overseen properly by the previous administration and need to be properly overseen by this administration. Now, furthermore, let me say to my friend that the budget that the President has proposed eliminates the capital gains tax for individuals on the sale of certain small business stocks. It makes research and experimentation tax credit permanent. 97% of small businesses will receive no tax increase in 2010. $28 billion in loan guarantees to expand credit availability for small businesses, and support for $1.1 billion in direct disaster loans for businesses, homeowners, and renters. Furthermore, the administration's, which you just saw them take action on, small business lending initiative, not to the big banks, not to the huge organization, but to small businesses, is focused on unlocking credit for small businesses. You and I have absolute agreement on that. We need to do that. You talk to your small businesses. All of us do. I had a meeting with my Chamber of Commerce, and we probably had 100 small businesses in the auditorium at that point in time. You're absolutely right. They're having real trouble getting credit. I talked to a county commissioner who has a small business in Calvert County. Normally could go into his bank, get a loan on a handshake for $30,000 or $40,000 to expand his business. This time he was looking for $40,000. he dealt with this bank for 35 years. And they said, I don't know whether they said Mr. Clark or Mr. Commissioner, but they said, yeah, but fill out the form, and it took him 30 days. Now, he got it, but he's done business with a small bank for that period of time. So we share that view. By the end of the month, the Treasury Department will start making direct purchases of up to $15 billion in securities backed by SBA loans to get credit market for small businesses moving again. In addition, in the Recovery Act, we eliminated, as I'm sure the gentleman knows, all SBA-backed fees on SBA-backed loans, again to try to facilitate small businesses getting credit. And it raises, I knew you'd want to hear me, it raises from 85 to 90% the portion of loan that the Small Business Administration will guarantee. And lastly, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has endorsed these steps, which I knew you'd want to know, to unlock the credit marks for small businesses. So we're very pleased at the definitive action we've taken to further the interests that you and I share of making sure that small businesses can make it in this extraordinarily bad time, which we believe previous policies have caused and which we've inherited. And I know the gentleman would like me to yield back at this point in time.
I thank the gentleman. And Mr. Speaker, how I would respond to that is let's take a step back and look at sort of the events that transpired to lead up to the need for today's votes on the AIG bonus payments. Okay? And I think that the events, if we follow them, teach us a lesson. The stimulus bill that included the provision prohibiting the government from disallowing the bonus payments was in that 1,100-page bill. I think it is fair to say, Mr. Speaker, no one in this House read the bill in its entirety, nor did the public have its right to know realized. I think that ought to give us a sense that we need to be much more deliberative and open about this process. And these ideas, Mr. Speaker, the gentleman is proposing to help small business, most of which we probably do agree on. But frankly, the better way to assure success and a positive result is to have an open process where we all have the ability to offer our ideas, that the ideas and the policies are not just handed down from the majority leader or the Speaker's office and imposed upon the will of the people of this country. So I would just reiterate to the gentleman that if we can see our way forward to allow the minority the ability to offer up real, positive alternatives, if we disagree, it would all behoove us to work in that fashion. We can end up avoiding the type of result that came from the rushed way that so-called stimulus bill passed this House. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield before he yields back?
I do.
I just want to make an observation. I understand what the gentleman said, but the gentleman will recall, of course, that your party had a substitute that it offered that lost on a bipartisan vote, as you recall. And so that the gentleman did have the opportunity, his party had the opportunity to offer a substitute, which a significant number of his party did not agree with, and certainly the overwhelming majority of our party did not agree with, in part because we perceived it as creating far fewer jobs. There's a difference of opinion on that, I understand that, but far fewer. Our perception was that it created about a third of the jobs, or saved about a third of the jobs that our bill did. But that aside, putting aside that disagreement on the figures, the fact is there is no disagreement that you had a substitute, you offered it, and it was defeated.
I thank the gentleman, and what I would just respond before I yield back my time is there was a stronger bipartisan vote in favor of our substitute than there was in support of the actual bill that passed. And I think that we can take that as a signal that this House ought to be open, ventilated, and available for debate. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the gentleman.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 12:30 p.m. on Monday next for the morning hour debate.
Didn't have the vote.